Hello and welcome to the Curiosity and Consciousness podcast. The intention of this podcast is to open your mind, get curious about yourself and connect to the power you hold within. I am your host, Karen Maloney, an inside-out coach, helping you to believe in yourself and manifest your desires. Check out the podcast, available on all platforms, and go to my website, www.karenmaloney.com for all info. Hello everyone. Welcome to another episode. And for anyone who may have noticed, I apologize. There was no episode last week, no new episode, and I hadn't posted any update either that there wouldn't be an episode. It's been a really rough time. My best friend here in Oaxaca passed away. She suffered a brain aneurysm rupture 2 weeks previous, and so there was a lot going on, and she got her wings last Saturday, and I just couldn't get my head around recording an intro, getting an episode edited to get it out. But we're back this week and we're continuing our series on cancer. And this week, my guest joining me is a repeat guest again, and it's Julie Williams. And Julie is a healer and scientist who combines her love for science together with extensive training in holistic and sacred healing arts for a powerful combination with a heart-based approach. She holds a degree in biology with experience in genetic and clinical research, along with practitioner certifications in family constellations, naturopathy, energy medicine, NLP, massage, yoga, shamanism, and intuitive arts. Inspired to create a natural healing method that could promote deep and lasting change, she has woven her diverse background together into a practice called consciousness medicine. This work leverages the mind-body connection at a deep and multi-dimensional level to identify the source of an issue and promote transformation on all levels of being: physical, emotional, energetic, ancestral, and spiritual. She has been a practitioner since 2003 and is the founder of the Center for Consciousness Medicine, where she offers one-to-one sessions, workshops, training courses, and retreats to assist people in removing blockages to create the life they want. I really enjoyed this episode with Julie, and she talks about how she supports people through different phases of their cancer journey, whether through diagnosis phase, treatment phase, or after their treatment as well. And she talks a lot about cancer coaching and helping people to deal with the shock and the fear that comes up with the diagnosis as well. She looks at cancer as a symptom rather than the disease itself, of something bigger, something out of balance in the body. And she does a lot of work around family constellations to see the ancestral or generational gaps or pains that may be within a family. She also looks at different parts of the body and where the cancer is showing up, and looks at the chakras and the energetic body as well to see the correlation there as well. She talks about how treatment and recovering from cancer is a marathon and not a sprint. And again, that the body has incredible healing capabilities. She talks about the mind-body connection again, and she shares how cancer can really reignite that life force energy and give people that will to live, and all the small stuff can start to fade away. So a really interesting conversation, and I just love Julie's energy. I think from her voice, her presence, you feel a lot of healing just through that alone. And if you want to find out more on Julie's work, you can go to her website, www.consciousness-medicine.com. But as always, I will have links to Julie's work, all her pages, from my website, karenmaloney.com, and click the podcast section. Enjoy. Welcome, Julie, and thanks for joining again. I'm super excited to connect again nearly 4 years later, and thanks for joining as well for this series. So first of all, welcome.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks for having me.
I'm curious, just even as a starter, we connect with you before, but even just to give us a little intro or what's been evolving for you since we last connected.
Yeah, well, I'm still practicing the consciousness medicine work and
Mm.
evolving that using the power of presence for healing across the body matrix, physical, energetic, emotional, ancestral, and spiritual. So, yeah, my evolution is moving more into training courses and teaching and getting the word out more broadly rather than trying to save the
Mm.
world one person at a time.
No, God, it's hard, isn't it? But I love that the power of presence, and I'm sure we'll delve into that as well. And I'm so grateful that you're joining for this series as well. And I'd love to know, what's your understanding of cancer and what's going on in the body when it presents.
Well, it's interesting because I've learned to look at cancer as more of a symptom rather
Mm.
than the disease itself. And what I mean by that is that it's your body's way of telling you something is out of balance, has been out of balance for a while, needs to be fixed because you're being faced now with a potentially life and death situation, right? So these
Mm.
messages the body gives you for healing and wants to get your attention, right? What is it a symptom of? That's the first kind of way of thinking about it, and what causes it and all of that. I mean, I'm fascinated by how long cancer has been part of our society and how much
Mm.
money we have put into it, but there's no cures yet that are out there,
Mhm.
you know. I mean,
Mhm.
there's lots of treatments, of course, and things like that, but like the vaccine for cancer or whatever, you know,
Mhm.
after all the billions that have been put into it. So it's quite a fascinating and complex subject. That's what it tells me, right?
Yeah.
That science, as a science background, that science hasn't come up with something with all the resources put into it, shows how complex it is. And it's
Mm.
not just a physical problem. There's also components across, spiritual, ancestral, energetic, emotions. And those all have to be dealt with, I think, in a very complementary fashion
Mhm.
for it to really, for true healing to happen.
I love that. And, especially that idea that it is a symptom rather than the disease itself. And if we can approach things with a higher perspective and that curiosity of what could be out of balance, what could be here, and not just the physical, like you said, on so many different levels, mental, emotional. And I think that's a part that's often left out. And like you say, it's kind of sad that after all these years and all this money, that there is still no solution. And like you say, that just goes to show that there is no one single determining factor of what causes it, from my opinion. So what do you look at then as well in your work if someone presents when it comes to maybe trying to get to the root?
Well, it's interesting because there's a few phases, when working with cancer, right? There's the diagnosis phase, there's the treatment phase, and there's the
Mm.
after phase. And those are three clear different categories of what's going on for people when we're
Mm.
working with it that really have to be honored, upon that diagnosis, the first place, I like to look with any issue, cancer doesn't matter, anything, is the
Mm.
family constellation ancestral entanglements.
Mm.
This is Bert Hellinger's work. I think we've talked about it before, in this deep soul loyalty that we have to suffering in order to belong to our family and ultimately survive. And so, looking at it from a different perspective, health crises like cancer can be an ancestral loyalty to suffering to try to belong to our family. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that sounds wow. It's like, again, it's what we hold unconscious fascinates me because we're obviously so oblivious to it. So, what have you seen from your work as well through that family constellation work and ancestral work that has come up for people that has been like that, a root of some illness or issue going on in their body?
Well, just in general, tumors, for example, like
Mm.
extra growths in the body can be loyalties to lost children in the system, for example. So that's a connection that I'll be working, to try to free people up from carrying these extra bits in their system, tumor or whatever that is. Um, that is them trying to hold space for a soul in the system that was lost, or many souls in the system that were
Mm.
lost. So that's an example.
Wow.
I also look at where it occurs in the body because that
Mm.
gives us an indicator for where the ancestral entanglements also may be, right? Is it in their chest? Is it in their brain? Is it in their toe? Is it in their, reproductive organs? This also gives us some clues of a pathway to take a look at where those ancestral entanglements might lie, who may have, died or been injured or killed or, lost their lives in certain ways, or certain things happen to regions of the body that this person's body is now being loyal to by creating cancer in that region.
That's so fascinating. And yeah, I'm just having a moment of going, oh my God. And, because it is like there's so much to us. Like we are such complex beings. We're not just a physical body right here in this moment, like that we carry all these energies and ancestral imprints and all this stuff that we don't know about. So it just fascinates me when I have these conversations as well. And, this is what you work in and this is what you're talking about. And it's like, yes, there is a truth there as well in the connection. And just what you said there as well about where in the body it shows up can give some information as well. Just generally, can you maybe share what some different roots or symptoms could be depending on where in the body it is?
Yeah, sure. And this is kind of brings me to the energy body, and
Mm.
working with the chakra systems, right? So, for example, let's say it's stomach cancer, right? That solar plexus chakra in the abdomen is about boundaries, will, empowerment, disempowerment. It's a place we take energy in from the world and we tuck it away to deal with it later, but it'll fester emotionally if we don't deal with it straight away. So, if the cancer is happening in the abdominal region, right? Kidneys also, like, I'm looking at that region and what that represents from the chakra perspective, which also dovetails into the emotional body because each of the energy centers are coming on at different ages, right? So, that could be something traumatic and dramatic that happened at the age of 12 years old, right? That some trauma, because repressed trauma, or trauma pockets, as I like to call them, these can fester and become stagnant. And this is also where cancer can develop from
Mm.
that perspective. If it's in the chest or the lungs, heart chakra, this kind of, usually what I see is wounds at that age that the chakra is coming online.
Mm.
Perhaps somebody lost a parent very young, or, has lots of heartbreak or wounds in that area, right? Again, the cancer is just showing us, hello, help, we need to look at this region of the body. Please come look more deeply at this and unpack what's going on from childhood conditioning, energy body wounds, ancestral entanglements that cloud the system and create disease.
Amazing. And again, when you said that again, whether it's a symptom or please come look at it. And that's my understanding now of anything that presents in the body. It's not our body giving up. It's not, it wanting out or not loving us anymore. It's that idea of it's truly calling for help. Like it's got to a point where it's drowning and it really needs our input now to reverse and bounce back because, well, not bounce back, but to reverse and undo, because the body is so incredible and it is a self-healing mechanism. But again, it needs our input. And I think when something like cancer shows up, it absolutely needs our input as well, and that support. So when you mentioned as well the different stages between diagnosis, treatment, and afterwards, what kind of supports, and I know it's very individual, and this is not telling people what to do, this is just sharing information of what could be. But in various stages, what suggestions or what supports do you give to people to help them through the different phases?
Yeah, it's a great question. I kind of call it cancer coaching in a way,
Mm.
right? Because upon diagnosis, there's shock, there's
Yeah.
fear,
Oh,
there's
yeah.
facing life and death in a way that, thankfully most people don't have to. It's a sacred journey, but it's shocking and it brings up a lot of fear.
Mhm.
And so I find supporting people in being able to ground them, work with the root chakra, get them to be grounded, connected, clear any disturbances so that they can really stay with themselves, because they have to make a decision. They have to make a decision about treatment, right? And walking the world of, science and allopathic and also complementary therapies, I've come across people who are seeing it as an either or situation. Should I do
Mm.
chemo or should I do natural approaches? And when you're in the midst of something so shocking and overwhelming emotionally, you have to be really clear and still and embodied to be able to make the choice that's right for you, because that's what's going to
Mhm.
work for you, right?
Yeah.
Like if you believe it's going to work, it will. If you don't, or, family is pressuring you to go one way, but you want to go another way. It's so really calming everything down, working with the nervous system, right? Because that kind of a shock can overwhelm the nervous system, and just get people grounded and connected and focus, decision by decision, because there's a whole bunch of decisions that are going to need to be made in the next however many months. And that becomes overwhelming for people. And so to be able
Mm.
to sit with them and say, okay, well, what do we know now? What is the next decision to be made? And just hold that space so that they're not jumping ahead to, well, what if and what if and what if. It's right. You can't make a decision until you get to that point where you run the test, you get the information, and then you make the choice. So that's why I call it cancer coaching, because it really is just holding the space, being very practical, holding that heart space. What are your intentions? Supporting them in what they want to do. So that's kind of the main thing. Also, I'm working just that first pass, family constellation work. Let's see if we can get this out of their system, right? Before they're running more tests and it gets more serious. So release the ancestral entanglements,
Mm.
balance the energy body, take a look, is there emotional trauma that's going to need to be addressed? Not now, because they're overwhelmed with feelings, and
Mhm.
emotions. We don't need to de-repress their trauma
Yeah.
right now, but we need to be aware of what are we working with. So that's kind of that first phase to help people be
Mm.
able to make the decisions for their health without getting too wound up in what if it doesn't work, and all of that. Just
Mhm.
being able to encourage them in that.
Yeah, I think that's so important as well because, like you say, the fear and the shock, and there's so many decisions to be made. And like that, absolutely, we could run ahead of ourselves and being able to be in the present, to be balanced, to again tune in and know what is the right decision for yourself, if it's you or whoever is going through it. I think that's so important as well, that they follow what's truly right for them and not fall into pressure, whether from family or society or whatever it is, to really tune in and to know what's calling them. So I love that as well, and I think it's so important. And then when they're going through treatment, what kind of options are available as well?
With treatment, because I have worked with many people on their journey of treatment and cancer,
Mm.
I found that people really resonate and appreciate the support to know, like, let's say they're going to have 10 chemo treatments, for example,
Mm.
and I know that chemo is cumulative. It starts off, they feel great, they give steroids, so you have nice energy and everything, but it's
Mm.
cumulative. So, people will go, oh, I had my first chemo treatment, it was great, I feel great. And I'm like, just pace yourself,
Mm.
because this is a marathon, not a sprint. It's going to be cumulative, and then just tracking that, because people can lose track of where they are in the grand scheme, and being their cheerleader of like, wow, you only have 2 more to go. Let's do
Mm.
this, because by that point they're feeling awful. Is this working? I don't want to do this anymore. And to help them keep that bigger picture, I guess, really helps them stay connected and make it through. So it's that kind of bigger perspective, but also, with the presence of healing and consciousness medicine, we can optimize any medication, including treatments, chemo, radio, whatever it is, that comes into the body to target where it needs to go. And the excess that would cause side effects, let the body release that. So during treatment, I'm also helping the body to maximize the healing effects of the compounds while
Mm.
releasing and minimizing the side effects, which makes the whole journey a lot easier for people, because it's
Well,
the
yeah.
side effects and everything that can really drag people down.
Mm,
Um,
yeah. And
so
what does
that's
that look like? How can you support the body to kind of release, to optimize what it needs and release kind of what it doesn't?
it's that mind body connection. Do you know?
Mm.
It's taking their body system or their body matrix and saying, okay, because chemo is, using that as an example, is poison. It's designed to kill the cancer cells. So if you're taking poison into your body, the body's going to respond of, get this out of me, right? So it's enacting that mind body connection so that their system knows, yes, this is poison, but it's targeted, let's let it go. You just sort of give it that command. It's hard to describe. It's that presence, but
Mhm.
I mean, I do this if I have to take an antibiotic. I take the antibiotic and I say, please work on where it needs to work, but leave my gut microbiome alone. And it works. It's the power of intention, right? And it's
Mhm.
the power of using your mind to tell the body what to do.
Yes,
Yeah.
I love that, and we'll definitely come back to that, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
are there other protocols or modalities that you'd use afterwards, or are they kind of in and around
Absolutely.
the same as well? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to depend on what kind of cancer it
Yeah.
is, what kind of treatment it is. So that's where it gets a little bit more specific and tailored
Mm.
to what's going on. But, just talking in general, also during treatment, people really need to have a really energetically clear community and environment, right? So
Mm.
I'll also help and encourage them because sometimes, I mean, we're empathic human in our human nature. So if somebody that you love has this diagnosis, what people often do is they internalize how they would feel if they had the diagnosis. And then you're dealing with other people's emotions on top of your own. So
Mm.
that kind of a thing, very quickly for people to be able to sort through and create a healthy support structure, people who can be there for them versus projecting their own fear of death onto them. So that healthy environment is really important, right? And then I'm going to be working more deeply with the ancestral patterns, the energetic components, and here's where I'm going to be working those emotional body, the emotional components, repressed emotions, repressed trauma, going much more deeply in that because as their system is being sort of broken down physically, the emotions get stored in our cells as well. So your emotions
Mm.
are going to become more available to be worked with and to be able to sort through them in a more, I guess, deep and focused way. So I'll be focused on the emotional body and working through that while also, and you alluded to this before that when we were talking about the body's giving us a message, right? So what's the lesson that
Mm.
this cancer is showing up to teach you, right? And so that takes a little bit of time, because that's why it's in the treatment kind of
Mm.
spec, rather than the diagnosis when everything's so overwhelming, because it'd be kind of
Mm.
rude to say, well, why have you created cancer for yourself? Like,
Yeah.
like, but by the
It's not
time
the
they're sort
time.
of, yeah, they've sat with it, it's like, in my experience working with people, the people who have really healed completely and overcome cancer are the ones that have learned what the lesson is. And so, a general lesson that I see quite a lot is, people who, for whatever reason, childhood conditioning or whatever's happened, don't welcome in support, right? And so going through treatment for cancer, you need support. Like you, right? You have to welcome it and take it in,
Absolutely.
whether you like it or not, right? So
Mhm.
it breaks down those barriers and allows people to be able to be open to receive support, which allows them then to open the channels to receive more life force energy. So that's an example of kind of the lesson that if you can learn it, move past it, you can be done with cancer in your body, right? So that's one
Mm.
example.
Yeah. I think that's a hard one. And I know definitely for my dad, or I don't know if it's men in general, but being able to accept support and accept that maybe you're not as strong as you were. And, there's a lot to that as well. And I couldn't imagine it.
Well, there is a movement, there's main movements in the family constellation work, and I call it
Mm.
movements of the family soul. And one of them is interrupted reaching out, it's called. So
Mm.
this is a movement between child and mother. When the child is born and becomes their own body outside of their mother, the soul of the child reaches for the mother's soul. And in a perfect world, mom's soul will reach back and there will be an embrace, right?
Mm.
If the mother's caught up in her own ancestral entanglements, if her soul's been fractured or she's lost children, for example, and her soul's not fully present, there's not enough of her soul to meet the reach of that child's soul. Thus, it's called interrupted reaching out. So picture, if you're reaching out, but you kind of fold your arms at the elbows, right? You're
Mm.
not available to receive. And that includes receiving life force energy. So if there's a parasite, which cancer essentially is, right? It feeds off its host. You're not able to receive enough life force energy to fight that and get that out of your system, right? So that interrupted reaching out movement is an example that is really important from that ancestral perspective to recorrect that soul connection so that life force can come in and this parasitic cancer can leave. So those are a
Wow.
few examples anyway.
Yeah, no, family constellation work is so powerful. And have you seen any spontaneous remissions or people who have, maybe done some initial work and then when they went for other tests again, there was no sign of cancer?
I've had a few examples of that.
Mm,
Where I remember I had a client a while back who had a testicular cancer tumor.
mm,
And it was, I think, his daughter who was into my work and sent him to me. He was like, I don't know what you do. I don't care what you do, but if you
mhm.
can help me, I'm here, kind of, right?
Yeah, yeah.
and and I taught him this, the mind body connection. I said, visualize, because tumors, what they do is they sequester blood flow, right? And they build
Mm,
vascular systems around it, which keeps them alive. I said, so do a meditation, just picture the blood vessels, the blood supply being pinched off to the tumor and see what
mm.
happens. I just gave him that because he was like, well, what's my homework? So I said, okay, well, try this mind body connection, and wouldn't you know, over time he came back and he said, yeah, I could actually feel it when I would
Yeah.
think of it. And the tumor disappeared. Now the doctors were putting him on some kind of new clinical protocol. So they took full
Mhm.
credit for that.
Yeah.
Right. But even I don't necessarily believe in what you're doing, but my daughter says you're good. So I'm coming to you.
Yeah.
He couldn't even deny that. He was like,
Yeah.
wow, that's super powerful. The power of the mind. Right. Now that's
Mm.
the exception more than the rule, because again, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Mhm.
And usually the remissions I've seen have been people doing a variety of things, right? Like I'm a big believer in complementary, like in these days of inclusivity, right? With, gender, race, everything like that. Let's include our health and the protocols we use for our health. Let's be inclusive, do you know?
Mm.
So the successes I have seen as people using a complement of both of those, right?
Yeah.
Which can become a full-time job, right?
Oh, yeah.
Which is okay because people are like, well, it reignites their life force energy, their will
Mhm.
to live, and they'll do what it takes, right? So I've seen people go into remission and be cancer free, for their life, and I
Mhm.
also have seen a couple of cases, which puzzled me for a while, where they would be in remission, everybody would be celebrating, and then the cancer would come back in a more aggressive
Mm.
form and they would be gone really quickly.
Yeah.
And it's like, whoa, does this, I don't know, like this is a whole nother philosophical discussion. Is it like when
Mhm.
you get your ticket home, like, is there somebody waiting for you? And somebody's like, hey, wait a minute, they didn't arrive. We need them back here.
Mm.
Do you know?
Yeah.
Get them back
Yeah.
here. Is there a bigger plan at work? So,
Mm.
I don't really have, the answer of why it's so
Yeah.
different, but I've seen it all across the board. Yeah, I've seen people, like I say, those remissions where it's gone, that's it. They never have to deal with it
Mhm.
again, versus they get over it. And then it becomes, I like this term now, living with cancer, right? It's
Mm.
like they've had it, they're in remission, but they still need to be aware, and this is the after treatment, they still need to be aware of stress, lifestyle, diet,
Mm.
all of these things that brought it on in the first place, right? And
Yeah.
it's not a death sentence anymore, really. For, it's so this being able to say, well, I've had it and I'm just living with the possibility, but I believe that I'll be free of that, versus the
Yeah.
other side of it. So it's quite an interesting subject, like I said,
Mm.
because it's so complex and so many people are so different. And I mean, I don't know, we don't have to talk about beliefs of afterlife and what religion and all of that, but like if your number's up, is your number up?
Yeah,
And
well, who knows? But I know I connected with the lady, Diana Cooper, before,
mhm,
who's really big in the UK and into angels and all that. And she had said something similar when we connected during COVID times, and she was saying not a soul leaves a second before they're meant to.
mhm.
But that's not to say as well, if something presents that we just think, oh, this is my time, I won't do anything, because we never know. And it is possible to heal and still have or live with cancer, whatever illness or disease, and still have another 5, 10, or a couple of years. So we just never know. But I think it comes back to what you said earlier as well. It's the decision by the person in the
Yes.
first place to decide whether they want to live or not, or if they're going to go all in and really look at all aspects. And like you said as well, it's a whole package. It's the stress, it's the lifestyle, it's the diet. But then when it's like, oh, but that person was so healthy and they never drank or smoked and they always exercised. But it's the mental and the emotional and the unconscious and the ancestral, like you're talking about as well. It doesn't just appear, there's always something. And just wanted to come back to as well, just following up on something you said, power of attention and that mind body connection. And just to speak on that for a moment, and like that, the visualization with the testicular cancer, but using the power of the mind as well to visualize themselves as full of energy or vitality or whatever it is, just to speak to the power of the mind for a moment and that mind body connection and the power that we do hold as well to influence different things in our life.
Absolutely. I like to call it beyond the placebo effect. You know, the placebo effect,
Yeah.
for those listeners who may not know, I mean, this is from clinical trials where when they're testing any kind of compound, they'll give a certain subjects, an inert, like a sugar pill instead of the active ingredient. But it's blind study, so nobody knows what they're getting. And there's results from, anywhere from 10 to 50% of people who, even though they got the sugar pill, if they believe that they got the therapeutically active component, they would have the same therapeutic benefits as if they had received the compound.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. And that's a human thing. We as humans, that's what we have inside us as being humans, if you get me, right? So enacting the placebo effect, that's the mind-body connection. If you believe it to be true, it's possible for all of us because we see this, we've seen this in so many humans that it's part of our makeup. So being able to take that and harness that connection of believing it will be true in that way. And clearing out, you're exactly right. You said it earlier. There's so many unconscious or subconscious components to this that we're not consciously aware of. So when we're talking about that mind-body connection, if 5 to 10% of what we do, feel, and react comes from our conscious mind, the rest is driven by our subconscious patterning, right? We can believe and believe and believe that we want it to be different. But if you've got this whole trailer truck of things in your subconscious laden down with emotional trauma or energetic disturbances or all of these things, that's going to outweigh your ability to consciously be able to overcome it, if that makes sense. So clearing out the subconscious attic while enacting the conscious mind-body connection is such a powerful combination.
Yeah, I think it's vital because just like you said, what we hold subconsciously is driving 95% of what we do. And we all have limitations in some way. We all have conditioning that doesn't support us. And that's not to say that it's going to manifest into some illness or disease, but especially if something presents, I think, like you mentioned earlier, it's that invitation to be curious, to look deeper, to want to know what might be out of balance, what might be hidden within, what might be holding me back, what might be presenting. I think if we can have, it's like everything, if we have more of a growth mindset to any aspect of life, it's going to be way more supportive than being so fixed and narrow thinking and just that kind of blinkers on and one track mind going, oh, this is it, or this is death, or this is whatever. If we can expand and look beyond and begin to tap in, that's the work of Dr. Joe Dispenza as well. It is all that mind power and remembering our power as well, and remembering the power of our body and the intelligence of our body to be able reverse and come back to wholeness. But it's not just going to happen instantly without our input, I believe, as well, anyway.
Absolutely. And that brings to the next phase of the after treatment, right? Of that, once you've done all this heavy lifting and gone through treatment and cleaned out your emotional, attic and basement and all of that, and you've gotten yourself to this whole place where you can trust in life and welcome in life. I'll tell people, the real healing begins when treatment ends. And what I mean by that, using chemo as the example, chemo comes in, it's a nuclear blast, right? It just strips you down to your base to get rid of the cancer cells. Now, after treatment is the rebuilding process, right? You need to rebuild your system. It's a prime opportunity, right? This is the trying to make, lemonade out of lemons, right? You now get to rebuild yourself by making lifestyle changes that you learned kind of affected and brought forward the cancer, and now rebuild yourself from a really healthy, balanced place, and that's where
Yeah.
nutrition and emotions and how you deal with your emotions and how you deal with other people and collective energies and all of that, it's rebuilding yourself. That's the post treatment where the real healing begins after that. And that cancer coaching, I think, because often people go, okay, my treatment's done, I'm done. And I'm going, whoa, wait a minute.
Hmm.
Now we can get started, right? Now
Yeah.
we can get started with the complementary therapies and the healings to rebuild you better than you were before. So this never has to come back again.
Yes. And I think that's the piece that's we often forget about, because if something shows up, we just want to process it as quickly as possible and get back to normal.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen that as well, that, it's just like, oh, let's just do this and then go back to normal. But the idea is, no, this is the old you, or the old version that is not in alignment anymore. And like you say, it is that rebuilding, and it is a marathon. It's not just going to happen overnight. It's not a race to get back to how you used to be. It's being compassionate and giving yourself the time and the space to rebuild. And, I've had connected with people before who've had it, and they said, and this is after as well, what you mentioned earlier, the lesson, they saw it as the greatest gift, because it was like this opportunity for a brand new clean slate to really let go of all of the bullshit and whatever didn't serve them, and really connect to their own truth and who they truly wanted to be and how they wanted to live their life, and kind of forget the rest of the noise. But that comes down the line.
Exactly. Well, when you're faced with life and death, right, the
Mm.
small stuff fades away,
Yeah.
and it just reprioritizes everything. And, that place of love versus fear as well, in that, because it is, for example, from the emotional perspective, cancer is repressed anger, right? And
Mm.
anger is the flip side of fear. So after recovery, if somebody lives in constant fear about it recurring, and they're making, let's say, choices on what they eat based on, oh no, I'm afraid that I'm gonna, that's still resonating with an unhealthy emotional vibration, right?
Mm.
Versus if it's, I love my body, I'm so thankful for this lesson, the gratitude component. Thank you, cancer, for teaching me these lessons, for giving me this next lease on life. And I am going to make the decisions now to make my lifestyle, towards health and wellness, because I love myself and I love my family and I want to be here for that. That is longevity
Wow.
versus,
Yeah.
oh no, oh fear, and I can't, and I
Mhm.
have this, it's just kind of, so that's part of the emotional aftercare of it as well, to shift into that zone.
And I love that, because that comes back as well to what you said about the power of our mind. And again, if we, even throughout, from diagnosis or when we've got through the initial shock to treatment, if we keep saying thank you or I love you, it's going to be way more beneficial on some level, as opposed to, like you say, keep holding that fear and freaking out and go, no, 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 no. And again, that's our piece to connect into our power and to shift our own mindset for the sake of it, even though things are so crappy, but choosing something different as well, because everything we think, we feel it in our body's listening. So it's having that willingness as well to dig deeper and really choose those words, as opposed to living in the fear. And I always say as well, play, be curious. Yes, it's serious, but play and notice how it feels in your body.
Yeah.
And, it's kind of like, what have you got to lose?
Yeah. And it's also like the phases, because gratitude,
Mhm.
you said it yourself with the friends, it's like after the fact, they looked back and went, wow,
Mm.
it's such a gift. While they're going through it, it's a little difficult to learn the lesson while you're learning it,
Yeah,
like to see the lesson while you're learning it. So that
absolutely.
gratitude component comes kind of towards the end. Sometimes people who are sort of on a conscious path can say, okay, I get this is trying to teach me something. I'm going to be grateful for it. But
Mhm.
usually the emotional spectrum and the early diagnosis through treatment is just about getting through it, hanging on, clearing it all out. And then the gratitude comes, later on. If it can come
Yeah,
earlier, and absolutely fun,
great. Yeah.
happiness, enjoyment, like all of that is going to, your life force energy comes from what fills your existential tank, what makes you happy, what brings you joy. And this is the other lesson with a lot of people. It's like they're working so hard, they're stressed, they don't have, the fun and the happiness in their life that they want to. So of course, their existential tank is going to be weaker with life force energy, which allows for this parasite to come in and grow. So you're exactly right. It's so important to have fun, and bring enjoyment back into life. And I think, facing life and death, that's where people say, what am I doing? Like, why am I going to work 80 hours a week? Like, that's not making me happy. I need to bring more happiness, enjoyment into my life. And that, from that spiritual perspective, brings life force energy in. So those changes are so important. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I love that. That it does bring a new perspective, like you say, that life or death. And yeah, the gratitude does come afterwards. But again, I think people throughout it can even, have a couple of phrases that I'm willing to work with this. I'm looking at this. I'm going with it. Again, it just changes the energy for us in the moment as well. And just before we wrap up as well, I'd love to know if you've any suggestions on how other people around the person who is going through the experience can support them in the best way. Because like you mentioned earlier, them bringing all their fear to someone is not maybe the best either. So what is some of the best ways that people around can support as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think just being aware of your own emotions and to be aware that you're not projecting your own fears onto the person, do you know,
Mm,
offering support, listening, do you know, because often they just need somebody to hear them, to listen. But also, what I hear from a lot of clients that I work with, it's like when they're especially going through it and they're in treatment, they don't want to talk about it anymore. Do you know? And then when you meet with people and they're like, tell me all about your treatment, they're like, can we just go to, out for a
mm,
walk and talk to the trees? Do you know? It's
mhm,
like,
yeah,
I think that's a big support, of being able to be there as a, let's just bring as much normality as we can and
yeah,
enjoyment without having to talk about cancer and treatment 24/7,
yeah,
because I see a lot of people isolate themselves from family members and friends because they don't want to be updating people and having to talk about their treatment and what's going on. They want to enjoy life, right?
mm,
So I think that's a big support for people, to listen, to be compassionate, to ask, somebody, what is it that you need, rather than doing something that you think they need. Tell me,
mm,
how can I help you? And if they say, it's okay, I don't need your help, then you take that and you say, well, I'm here for you whenever you need, whatever you need, in
yeah,
that. So because it is such a personal journey, and supporting them in their decision, even maybe if that's not your beliefs, right? Maybe they're taking 100% natural approach. You'd rather they're doing, not you personally, but, the person would
yeah,
rather have them, do the medical intervention, but respecting and honoring their choices and supporting them in their life, no matter what, are great tools that I see that can be really useful for people going through the journey.
yeah. I love that. And again, because that person is obviously living with it and probably thinking about it 24/7. So, yeah, I think talking about it then constantly with everyone you meet, it's just not supportive as well. And I know a friend of mine going through it at the moment has said that to us. She was like, please just don't ask me how I am or how things are going, because I just don't want to keep talking about it, which is absolutely fair enough, because again, there's enough going on. So, like you say, having some sense of normalcy and just that fun, or going out for a walk, or just being having a normal conversation for a moment and not having it overshadow everything is can be so beneficial as well. So, Julie, thank you so much for coming and sharing today. And please share where people can find out more on your work.
Oh, great. Thanks. My pleasure to be here and talk about this important subject. Thank you for
Mm,
your bravery and, courageousness to bring this out and open this dialogue. I appreciate it. So you can find all my information about my work and social media connections, community connections, on my website, which is www.consciousness-medicine.com. And that's got all the informations of courses and retreats and workshops and sessions and all kinds of good things on there, as well as social
amazing.
media connections to follow and be part of the online communities that I'm building.
Amazing. And as always, I will have all your links as well from the show notes on my website. And thank you, Julie, for what you're doing and for coming on and talking about this as well and being there, because I think even from your energy, I can imagine what an incredible support you are as well. And just your ease and your energy and your presence and your calmness. I'm sure it's helping so many. So thank you as well.
Thanks for that. And back at you. Thank you for the great work you're doing in the world as well.
Thanks for listening. And before you go, I would love to ask you a massive favor. If you enjoyed this episode or any episode of the podcast, I would love for you to leave a short review on Apple Podcasts to help it grow. If you could do that, I would greatly appreciate it.